Let's talk about something most people don't realize. I'm praying about it. It's a phrase almost every Christian has said at some point. Sometimes, it's exactly what we should do. But sometimes, those words become something else entirely. Not because we're trying to deceive anyone. Most of us don't even realize it's happening. We genuinely believe we're waiting on God, when, in reality, we're waiting for our fear to disappear. And those two things are not the same, because waiting on God and hiding behind spiritual language can look almost identical from the outside. Both involve patience. Both involve time. But underneath, they're driven by completely different motives. One is rooted in trust. The other is rooted in fear. The challenge is, fear rarely announces itself. It doesn't walk into your life and say, "Hello, I'm fear." Instead, it borrows words we admire: patience, wisdom, preparation, discernment. Then it quietly convinces us that obedience should never feel uncomfortable. But Scripture paints a different picture. The writer of Hebrews 11:1 reminds us, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." Think about that for a moment. Faith has never depended on having all the answers. Faith has never required every doubt to disappear. If we could already see everything clearly, there would be no need for faith. Because opportunities don't always remain open forever. And the longer fear goes unchallenged, the more convincing its excuses become. Welcome to Scriptura Faith Haven. If you're passionate about growing in faith, strengthening your emotional resilience, and learning how biblical wisdom applies to everyday life, consider subscribing. Every week, we have videos designed to help you grow spiritually, emotionally, and personally. Now, let me tell you about a woman named Rachel. Rachel loved God. There was never any question about that. She served faithfully at church. She volunteered whenever she could. Her Bible was filled with notes. Her journal was filled with prayers. And tucked between those journal pages was a dream she'd been carrying for years. She wanted to start a mentoring and counseling ministry for women. Not because it sounded impressive, because she genuinely believed God had placed that calling on her heart. The dream never disappeared. Every year, it came back. Every prayer seemed to point in the same direction. Every journal entry circled back to the same calling. Yet somehow, nothing ever moved. Whenever someone asked how the ministry was coming, Rachel smiled politely and gave the same answer: "I'm still praying about it." No one questioned her answer. After all, waiting on God sounds like the right thing to do. Until one conversation forced Rachel to ask herself a question she'd been avoiding for years. What if God wasn't asking her to wait anymore? What if He was waiting for her to take the first step? A few days later, Rachel met her friend Naomi for lunch after church. This wasn't unusual. The two women had known each other for almost 10 years. They'd celebrated promotions together, prayed through heartbreaks, encouraged each other through difficult seasons. If there was one person who knew Rachel well, it was Naomi. As they settled into a quiet corner of the cafe, Naomi smiled. "So," she said, setting down her coffee, "how's the ministry coming?" Rachel smiled, almost automatically. "I'm still praying about it." Naomi nodded, then took a slow sip of her coffee. "You know," she said gently, "I think you've given me that same answer for about 3 years." Rachel laughed. "I guess I have. I'm serious." Naomi leaned forward. "Last year, I'm praying about it. The year before, I'm praying about it. And today," Rachel finished the sentence herself, "I'm praying about it." For a moment, they both laughed. Then the laughter faded. Naomi looked at her kindly. "Rachel, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What exactly are you waiting for?" Rachel opened her mouth, then stopped. "I mean," Naomi continued, "what are you expecting God to show you that He hasn't already shown you?" Rachel looked down at the table. "I don't know. It was the first honest answer she'd given in a long time. "I've just been waiting for more clarity." Naomi nodded. "I understand." Then she asked another question. "What does more clarity look like?" Rachel frowned. "I've never really thought about it." "Would you recognize it if it came?" Rachel didn't answer. Because she couldn't. The conversation shifted to other things. Family, church, work. But Naomi's question refused to leave Rachel alone. That evening, Rachel sat on the edge of her bed with one of her old journals. Then another, and another. Page after page, she found the same prayer, the same dream, the same calling, different dates, different seasons, same direction. She whispered to herself, "How did I miss this?" What surprised her wasn't how often she'd prayed about the ministry. It was how consistently she believed God had been leading her toward it. The direction had barely changed. Only the dates had. That's when another thought quietly crossed her mind. What if I've been asking God to repeat himself because I'm hoping the answer will change? Sometimes we ask God for another confirmation, not because he hasn't spoken, but because we're hoping for a different outcome. That can be a difficult truth to accept, which is why Proverbs 3:5-6 gives us such wise counsel. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Notice, the verse doesn't say, understand everything first. It says, trust. Because trust begins where complete understanding ends. Rachel closed the journal. For the first time, she wasn't wondering whether God had spoken. She was beginning to wonder whether fear had been answering louder than faith. The following Tuesday, Rachel was catching up on emails before leaving for work. One subject line caught her attention. Opportunity to partner. Women's Community Initiative. She clicked it. As she read, her eyes widened. The director of a local community organization had heard about her mentoring work through someone at church. They were launching a new initiative for women, and they wanted Rachel to lead the mentoring program. She stopped reading. Her heart started racing. For a moment, she smiled. This is it. The words slipped out before she even realized she'd spoken them. This was the kind of opportunity she'd written about for years. The kind she'd prayed for. The kind she'd asked God to provide. Then, almost as quickly as the excitement arrived, another voice interrupted. What if you're not ready? Rachel leaned back in her chair. What if they expect more than you can give? She looked at the email again. What if you fail? Her finger hovered over the keyboard. She started typing a reply, then stopped. I'll respond tomorrow. Tomorrow became Friday. Friday became the following Monday. The email remained open, unanswered. Now, waiting a few days isn't always wrong. Sometimes wisdom tells us not to rush. But there's a question worth asking. When every opportunity creates hesitation, is it really wisdom anymore? Or has fear learned how to sound responsible? Rachel couldn't stop thinking about Naomi's question. What exactly are you waiting for? 3 days later, Naomi called. So, she asked, did you respond? Rachel sighed. Not yet. Why? I'm praying. There was a brief silence. Then Naomi asked quietly, Rachel, can I ask you one more difficult question? Rachel smiled. I think I've learned not to say no. Naomi laughed. Fair enough. Then her tone became serious. If God appeared in your living room tonight and told you this opportunity would succeed, would you send the email tomorrow? Rachel didn't hesitate. Absolutely. The answer came so quickly, it surprised even her. Neither woman spoke. Finally, Naomi broke the silence. Then maybe, she said gently. The problem isn't that you don't know God's will. Rachel looked down. Maybe, Naomi continued, you're afraid of what obedience might cost. Those words stayed with Rachel long after the call ended. That evening, She opened her Bible instead of her journal. Her eyes fell on Joshua 1 verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Rachel read it again. Then she whispered, Lord, I've always read that verse, as if courage comes first. She closed the Bible slowly. But maybe you were asking me to choose courage before I feel courageous. For the first time, Rachel wasn't praying for another sign. She was praying for the strength to obey the answer she'd already received. The next morning, Rachel sat at her desk. The email was still open. Nothing about the opportunity had changed. The only thing that had changed was her prayer. For weeks, she had been asking, God, show me what to do. Now, her prayer sounded different. Lord, help me obey. She smiled to herself. It was a small change, just a few different words. But somehow, they changed everything. Rachel placed her hands on the keyboard. She began typing. Thank you for reaching out. She paused, deleted the sentence, started again, then laughed. I'm overthinking this, she whispered. Finally, she wrote a simple response. She thanked the director, expressed her interest, and agreed to meet later that week. She read the email one last time. Her finger rested above the mouse. This is it. Click. The email disappeared. For a second, she just stared at the screen. Then something unexpected happened. The fear didn't disappear. Rachel actually laughed. So, she said softly, I really thought that was how this worked. She had always imagined courage would arrive first. Then she would act. Instead, she acted first, and courage quietly followed. That afternoon, she met Naomi for a walk. Naomi noticed the smile immediately. You sent it, Rachel nodded. I did. How do you feel? Rachel thought for a moment. Honestly, I'm still nervous. Naomi laughed. I was hoping you'd say that. Rachel looked confused. You were? Naomi nodded. Because too many people think courage means you stop feeling afraid. She shook her head. It doesn't. Courage simply means fear is no longer making your decisions. Rachel stopped walking. She looked at Naomi. You know, she said, I've spent years praying for fear to leave. Naomi smiled. And maybe God has been teaching you to stop following it. That sentence stayed with Rachel for the rest of the day. Fear isn't always something God removes. Sometimes, it's something He teaches us to overcome. That's why Paul's words in 2 Timothy 1:7 are so encouraging. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Notice, Paul doesn't say, fear will never knock on your door. He reminds us that fear doesn't get to define who we are. It doesn't get the final word. A few days later, Rachel walked into the meeting with the program director. She expected to feel intimidated. She expected impossible expectations. She expected pressure. Instead, she found a woman who smiled warmly, offered her a seat, and simply said, I'm so glad you came. Rachel couldn't help smiling. For years, she had imagined a mountain. When she finally arrived, it was only a hill. The meeting lasted less than an hour. By the time Rachel walked back to her car, she realized something. The meeting itself had never been the biggest obstacle. Neither was the application, or the planning, or the responsibility. The greatest obstacle had been the conversation she'd been having inside her own mind. Every excuse, every request for one more confirmation had all been pointing to the same place. Not uncertainty, fear. She sat in the driver's seat for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out the journal she'd carried almost everywhere. She turned back through years of entries, prayer after prayer, page after page. The words were almost identical. Lord, if this is your will. Lord, give me another sign. Lord, Help me know when it's time. Rachel smiled. Not because those prayers were wrong, but because she could finally see what God had been patiently teaching her all along. There comes a moment when prayer is no longer about receiving new direction. It's about finding the courage to walk in the direction you've already received. She quietly wrote one final sentence beneath her latest journal entry. Today, I stopped asking for permission to obey. She closed the journal. And for the first time in years, she felt lighter. Not because every fear was gone, but because fear was no longer sitting in the driver's seat. That's exactly what David discovered when he wrote in Psalm 23:4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. David didn't say God removed every valley. He said, God walked with him through it. Maybe that's the lesson some of us need today. We've been asking God to remove every uncomfortable step, while He's been promising His presence in the middle of it. So before you pray, Lord, show me what to do, pause and ask yourself another question. Has God already shown me, and I'm simply waiting until obedience feels easier? Because here's the truth. Faith isn't the absence of fear. Faith is choosing to trust God while fear is still whispering. And maybe that's exactly where you find yourself today. If this conversation helped you see your own journey a little more clearly, I'd love for you to subscribe to Scriptura Faith Haven. Every week, we explore biblical wisdom, emotional growth, and practical faith, not just to inspire you for a moment, but to help you grow into the person God is shaping you to become. Before you leave, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever realized that what you called waiting on God was actually fear asking for more time? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone reading your story may discover they're not alone. Until next time, keep walking in faith, even when the next step feels uncertain. Because sometimes, the miracle isn't that God speaks again. Sometimes, the miracle isn't that God speaks again. Sometimes, the miracle isn't that God speaks again. That what He already said is enough.